Welcome to another impactful episode of the PSD podcast. I am Craig King, your host, with your favorite host and your favorite guest. I think you will take a guess. See what I did there?
I see what you did. Guest.
Yeah.
That was good. That was good.
Yeah. So before we get started, this is for Patrick Kelly, everybody. Yep. It is for him. He has been killing it. And so
you've mastered that button. You are very good with the applause
just that button. I don't know what the other ones mean.
That's all right.
And what they do. So before we got on, and Patrick has no idea, this is real time. So I said I needed to find a viral picture that went viral in the last 3 to 4 years that could represent how Patrick feels. You know, he has been on the ground advocating, testifying, emailing. I want to know how many characters you have actually sent out in lands and women and advocacies and notepad writing. Whatever that number is.
I feel like I've been doing my part to train the AI overlords with the amount of writing that I've put out. So ChatGPT, you're welcome.
So here's the picture that I found that represents Patrick right now. A few years ago, Popeyes had the idea to rival Chick-fil-A chicken sandwich. And for a long time,
I remember that. That was sacrilegious.
And so this picture went viral of one of the workers from Popeyes outside, Patrick. Do you remember that one?
Yeah, that's how I feel. I feel that.
That's exactly how Patrick feels. So it's the lady outside, sitting outside of Popeyes, kind of with her elbows in her knees, leaning over with flour all over the place because she's probably made 1 million Popeye sandwiches in 24 hours. So,
but it's perfect for the end of a session because there's some loss there. There's some exhaustion and disappointment. But at the end of the day, Popeyes was slinging some chicken sandwiches.
Oh, man, they were. And I didn't try one. I have yet to try a Popeyes chicken sandwich.
It's good. It's good. But we should do a whole separate podcast on that. Plus, I feel like I get excommunicated if I speak against Chick-fil-A chicken sandwiches.
We're not going to do that. Teachers love Chick-fil-A.
Yep.
They're probably tired of Chick-fil-A too, but anyway, let's jump right into the reason why we're here, Patrick.
Okay.
So yesterday was Sine Die and the last day of session. We know they're coming back.
Can we just say what Sine Die is real quick?
Let's educate the folks.
Look, I'm a government teacher. I didn't know what Sine Die meant until I started this thing, and when that term started getting thrown around, I was like, that's kind of dark. Like it's got die in it and it's the end of the session. It's just Latin for without a date. So basically what it means is the General Assembly is now adjourned without a clear date for return, which isn't technically fully correct because we know they're coming back on June the 5th to elect a Supreme Court justice. But the regular legislative session is done. It ended at 5 p.m. on Thursday, May 9th. That's what the state constitution requires.
So, when you have to share something with somebody, people always say, hey, you want the good news or bad news first? So let's go with the good news of what passed. Let's start with that.
Look, there was a huge win this week for education in South Carolina with passage of S-125. This is a bill that was introduced last year by Senator Greg Hembry, the chair of the Education Committee, and Senator Ross Turner from up in Greenville. It picked up several sponsors in the Senate. It passed the Senate unanimously. And this bill has actually passed the General Assembly, one chamber or the other, multiple times over the last 6 years. It's an idea that started over a decade ago with a PSTA member. This is a great case study in the power of teacher voice and the importance of persistence in the policy process. PSTA member Jennifer Tonini is a teacher cadet instructor, brought this idea to PSTA to provide enhanced lottery scholarships to future educators because math and science majors have been getting enhanced lottery scholarships for quite a while because there's a critical need for math and science majors. And there's a critical need for teachers. So it's not a incredibly complex policy concept, but it's an important concept because what this bill means is that if a student is an education major starting in the fall of 2024, so this thing goes into effect for the coming academic year, if they are a sophomore receiving either life or Palmetto Fellows, or they're a junior or they're a senior, those last 3 years of undergrad, they're going to get an enhanced scholarship amount. If they're on life, they're going to get an extra $2,500 a year. If they're on Palmetto Fellows, they're going to get an extra $3,300 a year. That's literal life-changing money. You're on Palmetto Fellows, that's almost 10,000 additional scholarship dollars that you're going to get during teacher prep that's going to reduce the cost of college for you. It's going to recruit future educators, because if I'm a high school student and I'm trying to figure out how to pay for college, and all of a sudden I see, well, wait a second, if I'm an education major, I can pick up an extra $10,000. Maybe I consider education when I didn't before. And then when I get out, I'm going to have less student debt, which makes my salary more manageable. This is a good policy. It unanimously passed the House on Wednesday night. The House had amended the bill technically, not changing the substance, but just some technical changes about implementation timeline and how the Commission on Higher Ed categorizes an education major. And the Senate adopted those House or accepted those House amendments. So the bill is done. It is enrolled to be ratified, which is just a ceremonial event where the President of the Senate and the Speaker of the House come together and literally put their signature on the bill. Then it goes downstairs in the State House to the governor, and the governor can sign it into law. Governor McMaster has given no indication he'll veto this. In fact, he supports it because it is called out by name in the teacher task force that issued a report last year. So this thing is done after 10 years of effort, after multiple permutations through the General Assembly. Big thanks to Chair Hembree in the Senate and Senator Turner for getting this bill introduced, to Representative Erickson in the House, Chair of the Education Committee, as well as Representative Tim McGinnis, who's the chair of the Higher Ed Subcommittee, for really making sure that this thing made it to the finish line. And this is a win. So future educators and current future educators, if you're listening to this and you are a pre-service educator and you're on a lottery scholarship right now, real support, real help is coming in the fall of 2024.
That's great news. That is finally across the line. So shout out to Jennifer Tenney and Richland too, who came to us with that idea years ago, and happy that is finally crossing the finish line. Any other positive news as it relates to wins in the General Assembly this session that you want to share?
Well, there are wins in the state budget, but this is also a good pivot to the next section because some of the state budget is done. Mm-hmm. The teacher salary schedule, as we've talked about on here before, is done because the House and the Senate versions of the budget both agree on it. But there are other portions of the budget, because the budget is massive. It's a $15 billion spending plan across hundreds of pages. There are areas where the House and Senate disagree. And so those issues, even though sine die was Thursday at 5 p.m., any bill that passed both chambers and had a conference committee assigned to it can continue to be worked on in coming weeks, and the budget is at the top of that list. There's going to be a budget conference committee, and there are some areas of disagreement in the budget as it relates to K-12 education that are going to have to be ironed out.
Okay, so when does that happen as it relates to timeline?
So the conference committee can start meeting at any point. There are 6 conferees, 3 from the Senate, 3 from the House. The 3 House conferees are Ways and Means Chair Bruce Bannister from Greenville, Representative Philip Lowe, and Representative Leon Stavronakis. From the Senate, it's Senate Finance Chair Harvey Peeler from Gaffney. It is Senator Sean Bennett, and it is Senator Nikki Setzler. They can start meeting at any time. When the General Assembly comes back on June 5th for electing a state Supreme Court justice, in theory, they could take up the budget if it is done by the conference committee, but probably not at that time. The more likely timeline is the week, and I'm probably going to get this date wrong, but the week that encompasses June 16th is when tentatively the General Assembly should come back to adopt whatever final report comes out of the conference committee. Then that goes to the governor. The governor can issue line item vetoes for specific spending lines in the budget. The General Assembly would then come back the week of June 25th to address those vetoes, at which point the budget would be finalized prior to the July 1st start date for the new state budget. The big areas where the House and Senate disagree on K-12, they need to address the biggest, literally, both financially and in importance, is the difference in state aid to classroom funding between the two budgets. The House sends an extra $230 million to districts for state aid to classrooms. The Senate sends an additional $200 million. Now, both of those are enough to fully cover the cost of the teacher pay increase in the new salary schedule, but an additional $30 million is a lot of extra money going to districts, so that will be something we're closely watching. There are also some provisos that are different between the two chambers. Both chambers have picked up a proviso to require effectively a ban on student cell phone use during instructional time. But there's difference in the language between the House and Senate, so they're going to have to iron that out. The House this week, in their second bite at the budget, because they get to go again since they started it, picked up two provisos that are interesting that are not in the Senate budget. The first would allow the state superintendent of education to declare an educational state of emergency and take over a local school district if an inspector general's report finds that that local school district has violated state or federal law. Current state law does not allow the state superintendent to do that. She can only take over a district under a educational state of emergency based on financial mismanagement or academic performance of the district. So that would be a pretty significant expansion of the superintendent's power. The Senate actually rejected that proviso on their side because they said it violated Senate rules for the budget, which makes me think it probably is not going to come out of conference committee, but that's an important one to keep their eye on. The other one is the House picked up a proviso that was introduced by Representative Bill Herb Kurzman and really championed by Representative Heather Bauer to allow DHEC, or whichever agency is responsible for conducting school cafeteria inspections, and I say whichever agency because there's some restructuring going on of DHEC. Right now, DHEC can only inspect a school cafeteria. It can't inspect the rest of the school. And that creates a really weird kind of twilight zone of who can inspect a school for rodents, for pests, for mold. And so the proviso would allow that agency responsible for inspecting the cafeteria to effectively inspect the entire school facility to make sure that it is safe for students and for teachers.
Great update. Thank you, Patrick. So as we transition to things that didn't make it across.
One more in progress.
One more in progress. One more in progress.
Transparency and Integrity in Education Act, H 3728, has now had two conference committee meetings. They had two this week, one on Tuesday morning and another on Thursday morning. This is the bill that passed the House and the Senate in 2023, had a conference committee assigned in May 2023. They didn't meet at all for a whole year, and then they met twice in a week. The conference committee is making progress toward coming up with a uniform report, but they're not there yet. Of special note for PSTA members is, as PSTA members that read the emails or listen to the podcast know, there are two particular items of difference between the House and the Senate versions of this bill that PSTA was really concerned about. One of those was a requirement in the House version of the bill that would have required a teacher to post any new instructional material that was not included in their course syllabus at the start of the year. They'd have to post that new material 3 days before they could use it in class. We think that's unduly burdensome. It also would have allowed a parent or guardian to withdraw a student from any instructional topic of their choice at the parent's sole discretion, and then the teacher would have to come up with alternative instruction. And members of both the House and Senate in the conference committee really dug in on that issue indirectly this week by talking about one example given was, well, what if a family says that the Holocaust didn't happen? Which is a real thing. Like, that exists in society. Under that House provision, you could certainly make the case that if a parent said, I don't want my child to learn about the Holocaust, even though it's in state standards,
right,
they could request their child not receive that instruction, and the teacher would have to come up with alternative instruction that aligns to state standards, yet somehow doesn't mention the thing that's in state standards.
Burdensome.
Yes, burdensome and point blank unworkable.
Right.
Like, you can't teach, like, God bless a high school U.S. history teacher who's supposed to prepare a student for the U.S. history end of course exam, but they can't mention the Holocaust. That's going to make the whole teaching of World War II a little problematic. And more importantly than standardized test, it's just a disservice to students if you can't explore the real elements of history. So the conference committee unanimously rejected that House provision. So that appears to be on ice. The other provision that PSTA is worried about is a House-inserted provision that the Senate rejected that would allow any parent in the country to have a private cause of action to sue any school district to seek injunctive relief against any instructional topic, to basically ask a court to prevent a district from delivering instruction. The House has it. The Senate rejected it. what was said this week is that the members of the conference committee, typically a conference committee has to pick either the House position or the Senate position. Well, it's obvious that the Senate doesn't want the House position, but the House apparently still wants some of their position. So what they have done is they have crafted an alternative to the House and Senate position. And what it does, as it was said out loud, because it hadn't been posted in text online, but what was articulated out loud is this alternative position would allow a parent of a student in the school district where the alleged thing has occurred. Now, it doesn't have to be the parent of the student who challenged and complained about an instructional practice, but a parent in the school district could seek a private cause of action in court at the end of all administrative remedies allowed under the Transparency Act. And basically, long story short, the Transparency Act says that if a parent, student, or employee of a district thinks that a district has violated the prohibitions in the Transparency Act, then that individual has to make a good faith effort to work it out with the teacher, and then with the principal, and then to the district level, and then the local board makes the determination. And if the parent doesn't like that, they can appeal to the State Board of Education, and then the State Board of Education gives a ruling. So what this amended alternative language basically would mean is, if you've gone through all that process, teacher, principal, local board, state board, and you still don't like the outcome, then you can go to court. That's what they seem to be angling toward, but to do that, they're going to need a free conference power, meaning the ability as a conference committee to write language that was not passed by the House and Senate. That requires a two-thirds vote of both the House and the Senate. So that's going to be interesting. That conference committee meets again on June 5th in the morning, which is the same day that the General Assembly comes back to town to elect the Supreme Court justice. So at that point, it is likely they will have a final report on the Transparency Act. They will go before the House and the Senate. They will ask for the free conference power. Then the vote happens, and we see what goes from there.
Yeah, I don't know what that's going to be a vote for us to definitely keep a close eye on.
Absolutely.
Because 2/3, I don't know, in the Senate might be a little tougher, would you say?
2/3 of the Senate would be 31 senators. Currently, there are 30 Republican senators, 15 Democrats, and one independent.
Yeah, so it's going to be a close one. Okay. Anything else, Dad?
No. Yeah, let's transition. Let's close this out by talking about the things that got closed out.
Yeah, and let's talk about those things that got closed out. There were some things that we were looking at in the final days, hoping to get across the finish line. So let's jump right there.
Yeah, so I mean the two biggies. There are a lot of bills that make it to the finish line. PSTA members can check their email and look at that education bill tracker that we've been sending out.
Oh yeah, I pulled it up last week. It's a moving document.
Yes, you will notice that there are a lot of bills, a lot more bills in the pending in Senate and House chart than there is in the made it to the finish line chart. But two that I know are of special interest to our members based on advocacy engagement this session, and because it was a priority in the PSTA legislative agenda, is S305 and S124. 305 was Senator Tom Young's bill that would allow teachers to get additional years of experience on their certificate based on related work experience. I've worked in a chemistry lab. I'm teaching chemistry. I can get years on my certificate based on the prior chemistry lab work. Therefore, I get paid more. PSTA strongly supports that bill. It was in the teacher task force report as a recommendation. The other bill is S124, which would have created a limited non-certified teacher pilot, so individuals could teach without teacher certification. This was Senator Hembree's bill, but it was a really structured non-certified program. It's not like a state like Oklahoma basically just threw the door open and said, if you want to come teach, come teach. Yeah. S124, an individual with a bachelor's degree in their teaching area and 5 years of work experience and passing a background check and doing prior training, could be hired as the teacher of record, but then would have to enroll in teacher certification within 3 years of hiring. That bill was still in play this week. And both of those bills, the House had inserted H4280, the Educator Assistance Act, into those bills in the House Education Committee process in full. They took the whole Educator Assistance Act that the House had passed in 2023 and dumped it into S305 and into S124 as a means to keep those bills alive. Chair Lady Erickson articulated multiple times that her desire was to give the full Senate a chance to vote on those bills because on the Educator Assistance Act, because it had not come out of the Education Committee. So this week, the House sent on Tuesday, the House sent across S305 and S124 with the Educator Assistance Act to the Senate. The Senate received those bills, and on Wednesday, they voted to insist on the Senate position, to in effect reject all the inserts that the House had made, including the Educator Assistance Act. That then sent the bill back to the House. On Thursday, the House voted to insist on their version of the bill with the Educator Assistance Act inserted. That sent the bill back to the Senate. The Senate would have needed to have appointed members to a conference committee by 5 p.m. on Thursday to keep the bill alive. The Senate did not appoint members to a conference committee for either S124 or S305, which means both bills are now dead, and they will have to restart the legislative process in January 2025. That's obviously a disappointment.
Yeah.
It's a disappointment to not see the underlying bill of S305, Senator Young's bill, get to the finish line. It's a concern. It's a disappointment to not see the Educator Assistance Act get to the finish line. And so there's no sugarcoating it. I know that PSTA members are going to be disappointed about that. I'm disappointed about that. But I think that there's some things people need to remember about these bills. Number one, the legislative process is slow. It is much easier to block a bill in the South Carolina legislature than to pass it. We started this episode by talking about S125, Lottery Scholarship Bill. That idea has been in play for a decade.
Yeah.
It finally got to the finish line. Now I hope and I pray that S305 and the Educator Assistance Act, which will have new numbers next year because let's just make it confusing. We'll number them differently.
Different numbers.
But those are both new ideas. This was their first legislative session. They had not been filed in prior sessions. So they didn't get to the finish line, but they got darn close to the finish line. And sometimes it takes time to get a bill through. The second thing that I would remind members of is this isn't just about education. This is a systemic thing, not just in South Carolina government, but American government. I'll put on my AP Gov teaching door hat for just a hot second. Our system is by design supposed to be inefficient if your measure of efficiency is the number of bills that you pass. You can go read the Federalist Papers. I'll do it this summer. I do it every summer, and I'm just dorky. And in Madison and Hamilton, we're very clear that efficiency, while it's good, is also dangerous. And in order to get a bill to the finish line, the system is designed to make sure that it has broad support of broad stakeholder groups. And these bills didn't get there this year, but they're not alone. Like, I don't want people to look at S305 and S4280 and go, well, this was just picking on teachers. Let me give you two examples that have nothing to do with teaching. Senator Tom Davis from the Low Country, for the last 10 years, has been working a bill to provide for limited legal medical cannabis in South Carolina. It's a very restricted bill. And, I don't really care what people's thoughts are on whether that's a good policy concept or not. The point of this is he's been working that for 10 years, and he is one of the leading members of the Senate. He is the chair of a standing committee, and for 10 years he's been working this bill. He got it through the Senate again this year, and it died in the House again. The other thing that I think is even more illustrative on this point is this year there was a bill to restructure the 6 public health agencies in South Carolina that had the support of the Speaker of the House. The bill was authored by the chair of the Senate Finance Committee. It got a 92 to 16 vote in the House, a 44 to 1 vote in the Senate, but it died at 4:55 p.m. on a procedural tactic in the House on Thursday afternoon. That bill could not have had more universal support. It had the support of leading members of both parties in both chambers, and it died.
Yeah.
So I don't say that to try to say, well, don't be disappointed. I'm disappointed that S305 and S4280 didn't pass, but that's the way the legislative process works sometimes. And so what I told yesterday, a disappointed teacher was texting me about those bills, and what I said was, at the end of a session, celebrate the victories, celebrate S125, celebrate the increased teacher salary schedule, but learn from the losses. And there are lessons to be learned here, and PSTA is going to be right back at work on those two policy concepts for the coming legislative session. Senator Young has already committed to refiling S305. It's coming back. On the Senate floor for the Educator Assistance Act piece, Senator Hembree and Senator Setzler had a bit of a dialogue about it. And Senator Hembree said there are some important policy ideas in the Educator Assistance Act that deserve attention and deserve to have debate and to potentially get passed into law, but it needed more time. And so January 2025 is more time. We're going to be at work on those. So that would be my encouragement to people about this. I know it doesn't help in the short term, especially if you were looking at S305 as a salary increase for fall 2024. Man, I get that. That's a gut punch, and I hate it. But that doesn't mean we're going to stop working on it.
That's right. And I do want to take a moment to not only acknowledge all the work that you've done, Patrick, but also the work that our teachers have done over the course of the past few months as it relates to advocacy. I mean, they have, we can pinpoint teacher voice making an impact not only on the budget but also on legislative items that we talked about today. And so it is progress. It is a process. And so when we look at next legislative session, when we look at the work that we do as a staff, but also when we have these groups up here for Hill Days, we understand that, hey, these two items were very important on the radar of the teachers, so we can, in essence, plan to be more specific and direct in some of those advocacy efforts, whether it be digital or in person. And so we're not giving up, as Patrick shared. We're going to keep fighting the good fight, and let's celebrate those victories. And throughout the summer, any updates that we need to share, we'll make sure that we do that. Before we take off for the rest of the day or this week or this episode, Patrick, anything else you want to share?
Yeah, last thing is just while a bill like S305 or the Educator Assistance Act can't start working the process again until January 2025, the best thing that we can do to help it fly out of the gate in January 2025 is have conversations with legislators between now and then, especially in an election year. We're recording this on Friday, May the 10th. If you're hearing our voices,
deadline.
If you're hearing our voices prior to May 12th, get online and register to vote.
That's right.
And then as you have conversations, because one reason the General Assembly won't be back until early June is because they're going home to campaign. Mm-hmm. They're going to be out in your communities. They're going to be at events. If you see a candidate for the General Assembly, go introduce yourself. Tell them you're an educator in their community. Tell them that you are happy to share about the experience of educators, and go ahead and drop a nugget in their ear about you hope when they get elected that they push for work experience credits on certificates like S305, that they push for a permanent educator certificate with no recertification requirement like H4280, because your voice educates them and informs them. I cannot tell you, over the last week and a half, I've had more conversations with members of the General Assembly about the breach of contract statute for teachers than I've had in my entire career with PSTA, because PSTA members have shared their voice through email, through newspaper articles. There was a great article in The State a few weeks ago that highlighted a PSTA member who had her certificate, her local school district tried to get her certificate suspended because she had to move mid-school year to keep her family intact because her husband got a new job in a different city. Mm-hmm. Those stories have captured the attention of legislators, and they're understanding an issue that they didn't understand before, not because they didn't care, but because they've got to address all these issues.
That's right.
And so you've got to educate them, use the opportunity during the off session to educate them so that when these bills come out of the gate in January 25, they know what they're about and they're ready to support them.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't think you said this, but you just said 20 fry, and it made me hungry, Patrick.
It's almost lunchtime.
Is this fry? Yay, Friday.
Yes.
The key word in that is fry.
Yep.
All right, Patrick, it's been another impactful episode of the PSTA podcast. I'm Craig King, your host. See you next time.